I'll show you how I painted this earth dragon with peonies in this video. Stay with me until the end to see how I started this painting up to painting the details. I sketched a lot of dragons in the last quarter of 2023, and this is what I came up with. I also colored my final sketch with colored pencils to see how it looks like when it has colors. Once my sketch was final, I transferred the drawing to my watercolor paper using a LIGHTPAD. If you want to see how I transfer outline drawings as neatly as possible and how to use the LIGHTPAD, check the card at the top or the links in the description box. Then, I take my watercolor paper to my board using a masking tape. Next is to mask the drawing with masking fluid to prevent it from having paint when I paint the background. I'm using graphic gum, masking fluid, Princeton Select Synthetic Round Brush size 4 with a diluted liquid soap in a jar. I always have my towel on my right to remove excess water or paint. Before I dip my brush into the masking fluid, I dip my brush into the liquid soap first to protect my brush from damage. And then, I apply the masking fluid to my watercolor paper. I repeat this process until I finish putting on masking fluid to all the areas needed. I didn't cover the whole drawing. I only mask those areas that will be touched when I paint the background. Once it's done, I let it dry naturally and I take a break to have my lunch. Once the masking fluid had dried, I prepared Daniel Smith Iridescent Antique Gold for the background. I used a flat brush to wet my paper with clean water. I used a mop brush to paint the background. I only use a tea consistency mix of the antique gold. I want it to be as light as possible, but with a shimmering effect. I painted the background with circular motion strokes and used the tip of the brush for the small areas as I painted them, carefully avoiding the areas without the masking fluid. I didn't cover the whole image with masking fluid, especially those areas in the middle that I knew the background paint wouldn't touch. I painted section by section and I didn't run through the entire paper in one go. I take time as I paint. When I'm happy with the color of the background, I love the painting to dry naturally. I didn't use a heat gun because the heat can ruin the paper with the masking fluid. I used this rubber eraser to take off the dried masking fluid. I made sure the masking fluid had been removed and no dried masking fluid was left on my paper. I mixed quinacridone magenta from Core with Daniel Smith's New Gamboge for the peonies. It created a very nice peachy color. I mixed permanent sap green from Winsor & Newton Professional with Daniel Smith English Red Ochre and a bit of French Ultramarine, also from Daniel Smith. The darker green mix I have is a mixture of Winsor & Newton's permanent sap green with coarse dioxazine purple and a bit of sepia from Shinhan PWC. For the brushes, I use Princeton Heritage round brush size 6 and Heavenly Paintings round brush size 4. I started painting the peony petal at the very top with the tea consistency of my peach mixture. This is wet on wet because it is easy to correct or change if I make a mistake. I'm careful not to touch the dragon and I would like to maintain the shape of the dragon and the peonies as much as possible. I always start with the wet on wet technique and with tea consistency. In that way, it would be easy to correct the mistakes. It's easy to add colors and lift colors. With watercolors, the technique always starts from light to dark, When you paint dark on the first layer, it isn't easy to correct it. I used to wet the inner wings of the dragon using a mop brush to wet the dragon because it had a bigger space than the peonies. I used the consistency of my earthy green mixture. I used another brush to wet the inner wings and added more green to the wings. I softened the edges with a damp brown brush before continuing to add more green. As I moved to the other parts of the dragon, I wet the paper first using the mop brush, and then I let the paper absorb the water before adding the paint. Letting the paper absorb the water first is helpful, not to have the paint on top of the paper. Instead, the paper will absorb the paint as well. In doing the wet-on-wet technique, the paper shouldn't be puddling, and I avoid adding dripping watery paint on top of it. If you do, the painting will dry with harsh edges that are hard to correct. I wanted the neck and the face of the dragon will be as light as possible. I used one color mixture on this dragon, so I played with the values on this painting. I was careful about painting the foot because of its shape and toes are tiny. Luckily, I use a pointy round brush that helps a lot in painting with the small areas and details. The same in painting the hands because the fingers are thin and small. I use 7 by 10 inches of watercolor paper, so it's challenging to paint the tiny areas. I use the bigger brush to lift the colors and to soften the edges at the same time when the paint goes out of line. I would like to have a transition of the green to the gold on the chest to the neck area, and painting this using a wet-on-wet technique can help the paint to flow easily with a nice color transition. I used a tea consistency of quinacridone gold for the chest and the neck and added green at the bottom of the chest near the hands. I painted the face as light as possible, then I moved to the inner wings at the right. I mix a new mixture with quinacridone gold, green gold, and sepia. I painted the thin part of the wings with the new green mix using the wet-on-wet technique. Then I added another layer right away with the same green mix. The same on the other side. This new green mix helped to separate the wing part from the part of the wings with bones. It also helps the inner wings to pop up more. I let the dragon rest and move to the peonies on the left and on the right with tea consistency of the same peach color I mixed earlier. On the right peonies, I painted them petal by petal. I do not paint all of the petals in one go. For me, painting petals by petals helps me focus on each of them and that helps in avoiding the painting to look flat and dull. I carefully painted the petals following the shape. Not all of the petals are in one direction. I used quinacridone gold for the center of the peonies, and I painted them lightly. Later on, I will build the colors slowly. The important in watercolor painting is to paint from light to dark. This is just the first layer, so as much as possible, I paint light and I will add saturated colors later. I always wet the paper first before adding colors. This way, I can easily correct my mistakes, lift some colors, and the colors run smoothly on the paper. When you paint wet on dry, I mean when you put paint on dry paper, the paint will be permanent. It's difficult to correct mistakes and you can't lift the colors easily. That's the reason I always do wet on the first layer, and then I do wet on dry when I paint the details. If you don't notice, I switch brushes from time to time. I use the size 6 round brush to wet the paper and then the size 4 round brush to paint. This is convenient for me so I don't need to wash my brush again and again as I paint. For the stem and the leaves, I mix permanent sap green from Winsor & Newton Professional with Daniel Smith French Ultramarine. I painted the stem using the wet on dry technique because the stem is small and thin. In that way, the paint won't run to the areas I don't intend to. In painting the spikes of the dragon, I painted the tiny spikes using the wet on dry technique, but still painted wet on the bigger spikes. I use the darker green mix here with the sepia and dioxide purple. I will still add saturated colors later, so stay calm. I would like the spikes and the tail a bit darker than the body, but still I would like to maintain the dragon's earthy green color. I use quinacridone gold for the lower part of the dragon's body near the tail. I would like it to be the same color as the chest. It looked like I missed painting a small area of the wings on the right, so I went to it with the darker green mix. I also painted the jaw with the same color. This is the second layer, so I have darker and milk consistency of the colors I used earlier. I started with the inner wings on the left with the wet on wet technique. This is also the stage where I build the shadows of the dragon and the peonies. I don't have a reference photo, it's pure imagination on this painting. If you paint from the imagination, always keep in mind the lights and the shadows so your painting won't look flat and dull. I added shadows on the wings on the left and the right. This is the stage where I will build colors, shadows, and contrast. I added more color to the wings behind the pearl. This helped the pearl to pop up more and to have dimension. Adding more color to this part helped to show the wing I'm painting at the moment is somewhere behind. I also painted the hands of the dragon, especially the fingers that hold the pearl. I added more colors to the dragon's nape with wet on wet, but then I softened the edges to avoid this part from drying with harsh edges. I also added more green on the head to define the shape of the face of the dragon. I also added more color on the face to define the shape like the cheeks and the jaw. I added more green at the back near the dragon's tail and on some of the lower part of the spikes at the back. I'm slowly building a community of aspiring watercolor artists, and I will be glad if you sign up for my newsletters to be updated on what I do and what will be upcoming. Check the description box below for the link to join my mailing list. I added more green on the arms and the hands. I'm painting this with a wet on dry technique, but I softened the edges to avoid drying with harsh edges. It's like I'm fading the edges to have a smooth transition from dark to light color. I also added more green below the chest, the limbs, and the foot to define the shape. I added more color to the side of the chest, the arms, and the side. Adding more green can help to show the shape of the body. I also added more green to the back of the head and the spikes. As much as possible, I avoid adding details. I would like to have a less detailed painting, but once your eyes look at this painting, it can easily capture the image. If you do not notice, somehow the colors I use for this painting are complementary. It means the two colors I use in this painting are on the opposite sides of the color wheel in glass saturated colors. It's red and green, but the color of 2024 is peach, and this here is an earth dragon. That's the reason I painted with an earthy green color. In my previous watercolor tutorial, I also used complementary colors with yellow and purple pansies. If you want to see my pansies watercolor tutorial, check the link in the description box or the link at the end of this video. I defined the shape of the wings with the milk consistency of the dark green mix I had. I added more quinacridone gold on the chest with a wet on wet technique, and I added more shadow on each line and the side. I added saturated peach on the inside petal at the top of the dragon to define the shape. It helped to show the petal is folded on both sides. I also added saturated peach on the peony buds on the left to show there are multiple petals folded in the buds. I also added more peach on the petals on the left to define the diamond shape of the image. I added more peach on the side of each petal on the peonies at the right to define the shape of each petal and to show there are separated petals. I was carefully adding saturated peach on the peonies because I didn't have any photos for reference. I defined the shape of the big petal going down on this peony, and I would like to maintain the diamond shape as much as possible. I used the same technique in painting the previous peony. If you want to paint this dragon with peonies using your version or follow along with this tutorial, I created an outline drawing that you can print. All you have to do is check the description box to download the free outline drawing. As much as possible, I would like to help aspiring watercolor artists like you. That's the reason I created this YouTube channel in which I show my process in detail with voiceover and free outline drawing. So if you like this watercolor tutorial, please tap the like button, subscribe to my channel, and tap the notification bell to see more tutorials like this. I painted the inside petals of the peonies, and I left some parts of the first layer to show that the petals are folded and separated from each other. I painted this with a wet on wet technique for a smooth flow of color. This peony is facing the right, so what you can see only are the overlapping petals. I painted the second layer of the peony petals with a milk consistency of peach, and I left some of the first layers I painted earlier to show the dimensions of the folded petals. I added a cream consistency of quinacridone gold to the stamen of the peonies. I painted this with a wet on dry technique to pop those stamens up a bit. I painted the dragon's upper tail with a second layer and milk consistency of quinacridone gold to add saturation. I painted a second layer of milk consistency of peach on the petals on the left to enhance the color. I also added a second layer on the small leaves behind the dragon and painted the eyes with peach and enhanced the color of the face. I painted the pearl with tea consistency of antique gold. I would like to show the pearl is white with shimmers. I enhanced the color of the dragon and peonies with milk to cream consistencies to finalize my painting. I also added a butter consistency of antique gold to the dragon's chest, pearl, and stamen to enhance the shimmers. This is my finished 2024 Earth Dragon with Peonies watercolor painting. I hope you learned something from this video, and I also suggest watching my other watercolor tutorials here.